We're going to talk about how to create good stories, where to start, or if you want to adopt the storytelling technique into creating content, how can you start? So the first thing you should start with is your brand identity. And when I say brand identity, I don't mean your logo. I mean what your brand stands for. So what's your brand promise? What's the mission, the vision? Those are not some sort of statements that you create at the beginning of starting your business and then you post them on your website and you forget about them. Those are dynamic, living and breathing brand assets that you should be using every time you create content or every time you communicate with your audience. You can't tell a story if you don't know who you are. You don't know how you're going to tell that story, what kind of words, what kind of language, what kind of visuals, what kind of content frequency that you're going to create if you don't have an idea of who you are as a brand and how you want to introduce that to the world. So this is why the first step is finding out or crafting your brand identity. Your brand identity would naturally be filled with stories. The story of why you started that business, your story of how your product can make people's lives easier or find a way to do things better, faster. Anything of that sort is inspiring, and it's a rich resource for finding stories. And the best thing about stories is that they are everywhere. So if you start to look at your employees, if you start to look at the culture inside your company, if you start to look at the way people do things at your company, this is great material for finding stories, and it's a great resource for inspiration, and it's totally inspired by who you truly are. So you're not faking it, you're not making this up, it's real, and you practice it every day. So if it's believable for you, it's going to be believable for your audience. So one of the good exercises to find out or craft your brand identity, if you don't have one yet, is to ask yourself, if your brand was a person, what would it look like? What kind of thoughts or characteristics would it have? Is it old? Is it reserved? Is it loud? Is it funny maybe? Is it bold? So you'll find that there are so many different ways that you can express yourself as a brand, and it's all about your audience and how you want to introduce your brand to them as a person. So because your brand should be somehow similar to those you target. So again, understanding your target audience is key here, and it's an important factor that would affect how you craft your brand identity. Your brand identity also includes the tone of voice, the colors that you use, and so on and so forth. So it's the look and feel and everything else, and how you're going to use that, or these are your tools to tell the world or to tell your target audience who you are as a brand. The second step to creating good stories is to listen to your customers. Sometimes brand managers or brand owners or business owners are somehow aspiring to be somewhere, or they have a specific vision for their brand, but in real life the customers don't share the same vision. They see them differently. So you may see yourself as a young, funny brand, but your audience don't share the same feeling. They feel that maybe you're a little bit reserved, or you're not for young people maybe. So it's very important that your picture about who you are or who your brand is in line with what your audience or how your audience perceive it. So it's important to listen to them, because at the end of the day, you're telling that story to them and you want that story to be believable. So to be authentic, to be genuine, for them to believe it, it needs to be in line with their own perspective of you. So you need to acknowledge their perspective, that you need to listen to them and incorporate that into your own brand identity and your brand stories. Sometimes if you're not if you don't do that exercise, your campaigns or your content would have some sort of backlashing, because if your customers are experiencing difficulty in finding your product, for example, and you create content saying we're everywhere, we're the nearest to you, we're close to you, and there will be a backlash, because that's not how they perceive your brand. They find it really hard to access your product or service, and you're creating content that says quite the opposite. So this is usually where customer backlash or the audience backlash comes from. So you need to understand the full picture from your customers. Even if it's a bad impression or negative feedback, you need to acknowledge it, and you need to speak to them in a way that resonates with their own perspective of your business. If your brand is new and your customers don't know it yet, or you don't have enough brand awareness, try to listen to the early adopters of your brand, even if it's just your friends or your family who are trying your product or service for the first time. Listen to them, ask them, how do you feel about the brand? What sort of impression does it make to you? And maybe like intrigue them with a question that, if my brand was a person, how would you describe it? Do you find it professional, maybe innovative? Do you find it bold, disrupting the status quo? Like, how would you describe your experience, or what's your perspective of your experience with my brand, even if it's just a new brand? The third tip here, when you're trying to create a story for your brand or to incorporate storytelling into your content, is to broaden your vision. So think 2 steps ahead. Think of a story that you can build on. Many brands or many creatives start creating a really nice story, and it resonates with the audience, but then they can no longer build on it. They can't have like variations, or they can't create several concepts based on that original story. So it becomes challenging, and it's the reason why so many brands, after being in business for a couple of years and communicating under a specific story or under a specific name, they have to go and change it, or start all over, or maybe do a rebrand. So because they cannot, their business has grown, which is great, but it no longer fits the original story, so they need a new one. So when you're thinking of storytelling, whether in your content, whether you're still crafting your brand story, think with a vision, like have a strategy in mind, because this needs to be something that is flexible, that is long-term, that is scalable, so that you, as your business grows, this story can grow with you, and you can continue to build on based on that story, and it would still feel relevant to your audience, to your business, and to whatever your business, even if you extend your portfolio, or maybe you do an additional service, or it would still fit the narrative. So it's flexible, it's scalable, and it's strategic. How can you come up with a good story, or where to find inspiration for a good story? The first exercise here is to start with a very childhood question. All children usually ask, what if? It's a very it's a question that intrigues your imagination. So it's a very good exercise to start with the what ifs. You'll see that so many films, and especially cartoon movies, start with the question of what if humans can fly, what if toys could talk. And it's it's a wide door that you open, and then the ideas start to flow from there. So start by grabbing a pen and a paper and think of questions that are what if but related to your brand. And it doesn't matter how silly the ideas get, that's okay. You may come up with a list that is very silly. You think it will never be useful for creating a good brand story, but you can never guess that so many ideas stem from that question, what if? And then your imagination starts to run wild, and you'll have many ideas that can be the basis for a good brand story. The second exercise that you can use as a creative strategist or as maybe a content creator is to build a world for your brand, or build a universe for your brand. You know that this is also another technique that they use in the movie making industry. So if your brand was a world, what would it be like? What would it look like? What would be its values, its rules, its language even? Or how would the people inside it look like? Of course, the people would be your employees, would be your customers. So how do they look like in that world? Where do they fit in that world? You see, from that idea, you will have a lot of stories. You'll find that there may be challenges in this world that you're trying to solve. There may be really little things about that world that nobody is noticing, and you want to focus on that or highlight those little things. So creating a world or a universe for your brand is a great way to make that brand feel alive. And once you feel that this brand is a living and breathing, it's something that is dynamic, you start creating stories for that brand. The third exercise is somehow related to the second one, but instead of focusing on your own brand and the world you create, it focuses more on the characters. So they would definitely be your consumers or your employees. So how do they look like now? What are their dreams, their aspirations, and how they fit into your world? What sort of impact does your brand create on their world? How will it transform them? How will it deal with their needs, their enemies, their obstacles? It's a great exercise to inspire brand stories, and characters can be very much different. And this is a way that you can even come up with consumer personas, like how you imagine the different people that use your brand and how they fit into your communication or your story. In the description below, we'll leave a link to 17 examples of great brand storytelling examples. Some of them are B2C, some of them are B2B. So the storytelling technique applies to any business, no matter what, whether you're dealing directly with consumers or you're dealing with business to business model. You would still benefit a lot from applying the brand storytelling technique into your content strategy. And if you have any questions about that, please feel free to leave a comment below or contact our team, and we'll be happy to help you with it.